Dad perfect events. I was staring at my laptop screen in my home office, reading an email that wasn't meant for me when my world fell apart. The coffee in my hand went cold as I read Sarah's message to her business partner. The old man finally transferred the last $50K. Once we close the Torres account next month, we can push him out completely. He'll never see a dime back. The old man, that's what my daughter-in-law called me. My name is Michael Torres. I'm 57 years old, and I just discovered that my own family had been running a sophisticated con on me for the better part of a year. Let me back up and tell you how this nightmare started, because it's important you understand just how carefully they played me. When David, my 32-year-old son, came to me last spring with his business idea, I was actually proud of him. Finally, he was taking real initiative instead of bouncing between tech jobs every 18 months. Sarah, his wife, who's a corporate lawyer with one of those downtown firms, had it all mapped out on professional spreadsheets. They wanted to start a consulting firm helping small businesses with their digital transformation. Dad, we need 280 kilos to get this off the ground, David had said, sitting across from me at my kitchen table with those glossy presentation folders Sarah had prepared. The same kitchen table where Carol used to help him with his homework 20 years ago. You know the industry better than anyone. You understand both the tech side and the business side. He was right about that. 35 years at Boeing's Seattle facility, working my way up from junior systems engineer to senior project manager, taught me plenty about technology budgets and corporate dynamics. I'd managed teams of 50 people and multi-million-dollar aerospace projects. When Sarah walked me through their market analysis and financial projections that evening, everything looked solid. Market research, client pipeline development, competitive analysis, even contingency planning for different growth scenarios. We want you as our founding partner, Sarah had explained, her lawyer voice smooth and professional as she turned each page of the presentation. Your investment gets you 40% equity, but you don't have to worry about day-to-day operations. Think of it as your retirement project. Carol, my wife of 34 years, had passed away 3 years earlier after a brutal 8-month fight with pancreatic cancer. The house felt too quiet most days, and frankly, I was excited about being involved in something meaningful with my son. The 280 kilo would come from my Boeing retirement fund and some savings Carol and I had carefully built up over the decades. Money we'd planned to use for travel, for spoiling grandchildren that never came, for a comfortable retirement together. But Carol was gone, and David was here, asking for my help to build something. It felt like honoring her memory in a way, investing in our son's future. I transferred the money in 3 installments between April and July, exactly as Sarah had recommended for optimal tax positioning. David was so grateful during those months, calling me every Sunday evening with detailed updates about office space hunting, client meetings, and partnership discussions. Sarah would send me professionally formatted monthly reports with charts and graphs showing their progress. Everything seemed legitimate, even impressive. They'd signed a lease on a small office in the Bellevue Tech corridor. They were meeting with potential clients. They'd hired a part-time administrative assistant. Sarah showed me business cards and a company website that looked completely professional. The first red flag came in late August. I'd called David on a Wednesday afternoon asking if I could swing by their office to see the setup, maybe take them to lunch, meet their assistant, see where my retirement savings were being put to work. David got weird about it. His voice changed, became evasive. "Oh, we're still getting the space organized. Dad, you know how it is with construction delays and permits. Maybe next month when everything's more settled." Next month became the month after that. Then it was, we're so busy with client work, it's just not a good time for visitors. Always an excuse, always delivered with just enough detail to sound reasonable. In September, I started noticing changes during our monthly family dinners at my place. Sarah had become more distant, less interested in answering my questions about specific clients or projects. When I'd ask about the Johnson manufacturing contract she'd mentioned in her July report, she'd give vague responses and quickly steer the conversation toward David's golf game or my consulting work. David seemed stressed too, but I figured that was normal for startup entrepreneurs. He'd gotten quieter, less talkative about the business details he'd been so enthusiastic about during the spring and early summer. But it was that email in early October that opened my eyes to what was really happening. See, David had been using my home computer to access some files when his laptop was being repaired. He'd left his Gmail account logged in on my machine. I wasn't snooping, I swear. I was just trying to get to my own email when I noticed he had several unread messages from someone named Jennifer Martinez. The subject line on one of them caught my eye. Torres Account Strategy, Phase 3. That's when I saw Sarah's email thread with this Jennifer person, someone I'd never heard mentioned in any of our family conversations or business updates. The Torres account, they called it. Like I was just another client to be managed, manipulated, and eventually discarded. I sat there in my home office for over an hour that night, reading through months of correspondence between Sarah and Jennifer Martinez. My hands were actually shaking as I scrolled through message after message, watching them discuss me like I was some kind of mark in a confidence game. Sarah and this Jennifer had been planning from the very beginning to structure the company so they could legally push me out once my capital was fully invested. They'd used corporate shell games and legal loopholes that they assumed I, as just an engineer, wouldn't understand or even think to investigate. The old man has been surprisingly cooperative. Sarah had written in one email from June. David keeps him updated just enough to feel involved, but not enough to ask the right questions. Once we hit the 300K threshold, we can trigger the dilution clause. Dilution clause, I'd signed those documents back in April, trusting Sarah's explanation that they were standard partnership agreements. She'd rattled off legal terminology while I focused on supporting my son's dreams, and I'd signed where she told me to sign. But here's what Sarah didn't know about this old engineer. I'd spent 35 years reading technical specifications, contract details, and corporate documentation at Boeing. I understood more about legal language and business structures than she gave me credit for. I just hadn't thought I needed to protect myself from my own family. The worst part was reading how they talked about Carol's memory. In one message, Jennifer had suggested they play up the sentimental angle about honoring my late wife through family business investment. Sarah responded that she'd already been mining that emotional territory and that I was completely hooked on the legacy narrative. They were using Carol's death to manipulate me. The woman who'd raised David, who'd taught him right from wrong, who trusted him to take care of me when she couldn't anymore. They were turning her memory into a weapon against me. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I printed out every email I could access and started making notes in the margins. The same way I used to analyze technical problems at Boeing. What did I know? What could I prove? What were my options? By morning, I had a plan. I called in sick to the part-time consulting work I'd been doing to stay busy. Then I drove downtown to the financial district looking for a lawyer who specialized in white-collar crime and business fraud. I found Stanley Murphy through Google reviews. Apparently he'd made a name for himself, prosecuting sophisticated financial scams targeting older investors. Stanley's office occupied the 15th floor of one of those glass towers near Pike Place Market. Professional but not flashy. The kind of place where serious work got done without show. When I laid out the whole story for him, spreading my printed emails across his conference table, Stanley leaned back in his chair and whistled softly. "Mr. Torres," he said after reviewing the evidence for 20 minutes. "If what you're showing me is accurate, we're looking at potential wire fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, conspiracy to commit theft, and possibly RICO violations if this Jennifer Martinez has done this before." Stanley introduced me to his associate, Patricia Foster, who turned out to be both a lawyer and a certified forensic accountant. Over the next 2 weeks, Patricia dissected every transaction, every contract, every corporate filing related to David and Sarah's business. She had me bring in all my bank statements, all the documentation from the original investment, every piece of paper I'd signed. "They're good." Patricia admitted during our second meeting in Stanley's conference room, charts and spreadsheets covering the mahogany table. Technically, the way they've structured this partnership agreement, they probably could force you out legally once they hit certain investment milestones. But they made one crucial mistake. She pulled out a document I'd signed back in April, pointing to a specific paragraph buried in the middle of page 3. "This clause here protects investors from material misrepresentation. Did they ever tell you they planned to remove you as a partner once you'd invested a certain amount? Never. Sarah specifically said I'd always be part of the company. That this was about building something together as a family. Then we have them for fraud," Patricia said with the kind of smile I imagine prosecutors get when they know they've got a solid case. But I wanted more than just getting my money back. These people had spent months lying to my face, taking my phone calls, eating dinner at my table, all while planning to steal my retirement savings. Sarah had calculated exactly how to manipulate a grieving widower, and she'd trained my own son to help her do it. Stanley suggested we build an airtight case before confronting them. If we tip our hand too early, they might try to cover their tracks, delete communications, or move assets offshore. We need to document everything first. So I became an investigator in my own family. During our monthly Sunday dinners at my house, I started asking more targeted questions about the business. How's that Johnson Manufacturing contract coming along? When I knew from the emails there was no Johnson Manufacturing account. What's the timeline on the Henderson project for a project that existed only in Sarah's fabricated reports? Sarah would elaborate these completely fictional client stories while David sat there nodding along, either completely clueless about his wife's lies or actively complicit in the deception. I started recording these conversations on my phone, building a library of documented false statements, The hardest part was watching David during those dinners. This man I'd raised who'd learned to ride a bike in my driveway, who'd called me crying when Carol died, who'd asked me to walk him down the aisle at his wedding because Carol wasn't there to do it. Was he really helping his wife steal from me, or was he just another victim of Sarah's manipulation? Either way, I was going to find out the truth. In November, I decided to set the trap that would expose everything. I called David on a Tuesday evening and told him I'd been thinking about investing another $50K for their expansion plans. Business has been going so well, I said, and I've got some additional funds from a Boeing consulting contract that just wrapped up. David's voice immediately perked up. That's incredible, Dad. Sarah's going to be so excited. We've been looking at expanding into the Portland market, and that kind of capital injection would really accelerate our timeline. Within 48 hours, Sarah had prepared a complete investment package. New contracts, updated financial projections, expansion budgets. She brought everything to my house that Friday evening, spreading the documents across my dining room table like she was conducting a board meeting. Michael, she said, using that smooth lawyer voice, this additional investment would give us the resources to really scale the business. We're talking about tripling our client base within 18 months, but this time I had Patricia Foster review everything before I even pretended to consider signing. What Patricia discovered made my blood run cold. Michael, she explained during our meeting the following Monday, this new agreement wouldn't just control your additional $50K investment. The way they've structured these amendments, you'd be signing away your rights to the original $280K as well. You'd literally become a minority investor in a company you funded. Perfect. Now we had documented proof of their intent to commit outright theft. But I wasn't ready to spring the trap yet. I wanted them to think they'd won, to get comfortable, to maybe even celebrate their victory before I pulled the rug out from under them. So I told Sarah I needed a few weeks to review the paperwork with my financial advisor. She agreed, probably thinking she had me hooked and just needed to be patient while I went through the motions of due diligence. During those weeks, I did something I'd never thought I'd have to do. I investigated my own family like they were criminal suspects. I started paying attention to things I'd previously ignored, like how Sarah always insisted we meet at my house instead of their office. How David would change the subject whenever I asked specific questions about their day-to-day operations. How neither of them ever seemed to have client meetings during evenings or weekends, which seemed odd for a supposedly booming consulting business. One Thursday afternoon, I drove to the Bellevue address they'd given me for their office. It was a legitimate business building, but when I checked the directory, there was no listing for Torres Digital Consulting. I asked the building manager about Suite 420, which is what they'd put on their business cards. Oh, that's been vacant for about 6 months, he told me. Previous tenant moved out last spring. We've been showing it to prospects, but nothing's been signed yet. They didn't even have an office. Everything had been fabricated. I started researching Jennifer Martinez, Sarah's supposed business partner. According to LinkedIn and other professional networks, she'd been involved in at least 3 other consulting ventures over the past 5 years. Each one had folded after 18 months, leaving investors with nothing to show for their money. Sarah wasn't just stealing from me. This was her business model. On December 15th, I invited David and Sarah to lunch at Morton's Steakhouse downtown. I told them I was ready to sign the expansion documents and wanted to celebrate our growing partnership. Sarah brought a briefcase full of contracts and seemed genuinely excited about closing the deal. We were seated at a corner table with a view of Elliott Bay, the kind of place where businessmen made important deals. Sarah ordered champagne to toast our expanded partnership. David seemed nervous, but I figured he was just excited about the additional capital injection. Before we sign anything, I said, pulling out my phone after the champagne arrived, I want to clear up some confusion about our existing agreement. I played them the recording from Patricia's office where she explained how their original contract was specifically designed to eliminate my ownership once I'd invested beyond a certain threshold. Then I showed them printouts of Sarah's emails with Jennifer Martinez, including the ones where they discussed the Torres account and strategies for pushing out the old man. David's face went completely white. Sarah tried to grab the papers from my hands, but I'd already pulled them back and tucked them into my jacket. Michael, Sarah said, her lawyer voice kicking into damage control mode, I think there's been a serious misunderstanding about the nature of these communications. No misunderstanding, I said calmly, taking a sip of the champagne she'd ordered to celebrate stealing my retirement. You've been planning to defraud me from day one. You've lied to me for 8 months, used my son to manipulate me, and treated me like some senile fool who wouldn't figure out what you were doing. David finally found his voice, but it came out as barely a whisper. Dad, I never meant for any of this to happen. Sarah said the contract terms were just standard business protection. Standard business protection. I looked at my son, this 32-year-old man I'd raised to be honest and decent. David, you've been helping your wife steal from your own father. From the man who changed your diapers, taught you to drive, paid for your college education. I stood up and dropped a manila envelope on the table. Those are copies of the federal lawsuit we're filing tomorrow morning. Sarah, the State Bar Association will be very interested in reviewing your professional conduct. The FBI's white-collar crime unit will want to discuss your pattern of investor fraud. David, you can choose whether you want to be listed as a defendant or appear as a witness for the prosecution. Sarah was frantically reading through the lawsuit documents, her legal training probably helping her understand just how much trouble she was in. Michael, this will destroy our family, she said. I put on my coat and left $40 on the table to cover my portion of the lunch they'd never finish eating. You already destroyed our family, I replied. I'm just making sure there are consequences. The legal process took 6 months, but it was worth every single day of waiting. Sarah's law firm suspended her pending the state bar ethics investigation within a week of our lawsuit being filed. Turns out corporate law firms don't appreciate having employees under federal investigation for wire fraud. Her partners were probably worried about their own professional liability. The forensic audit that Patricia conducted uncovered something even more damaging than what we'd originally discovered. Sarah and Jennifer Martinez had been running similar schemes on at least 3 other older investors over the past 18 months. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit got very interested when they realized this wasn't just a family dispute, but part of a pattern of targeting retired professionals with substantial savings. David made the smartest decision of his adult life and agreed to testify against his wife in exchange for immunity from criminal prosecution. The federal prosecutor, a sharp woman named Lisa Chen, explained that David had been manipulated almost as much as I had been. Your son genuinely believed he was building a legitimate business, she told me during one of our preparation meetings at the U.S. Attorney's office downtown. Sarah had convinced him that pushing out older investors was standard practice in venture capital. She showed him fake industry reports, made up legal precedents. He thought what they were doing was unethical but legal. Still, learning that your son helped steal from you, even unknowingly, leaves scars that take time to heal. The trial took place in federal court in downtown Seattle over 3 weeks in June. I testified for 2 days, walking the jury through the timeline of manipulation, showing them the emails, explaining how Sarah had exploited my grief over Carol's death to gain my trust. The hardest part was watching David on the witness stand explaining how Sarah had gradually isolated him from me over the past year, how she'd convinced him that I was trying to control their marriage, that older family members often had trouble accepting their adult children's independence. She made me believe that Dad was overbearing and old-fashioned. David testified, his voice barely audible, that successful couples needed to be financially independent from their parents. She said the business structure was protecting our marriage, not stealing from my father. Classic manipulation tactics. Make the victim think their support system is the enemy. Jennifer Martinez pled guilty early and received 2 years in federal prison in exchange for her cooperation. Her testimony revealed that Sarah had been the mastermind, recruiting her specifically because of her experience defrauding older investors in Portland and Sacramento. Sarah's defense attorney tried to argue that this was a civil business dispute, not criminal fraud. But the jury saw through that argument pretty quickly when Patricia presented evidence of the fake office, the fabricated client reports, and the deliberate misrepresentation of contract terms. The verdict came back on a Thursday afternoon, guilty on all counts: wire fraud, conspiracy to commit theft, elder abuse, and violation of fiduciary duty. Sarah was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison, followed by 2 years of supervised probation. But the civil lawsuit was where I really got justice. The judge awarded me not just my original $280,000 investment plus interest, but an additional $75,000 in punitive damages for targeting an elderly investor through emotional manipulation. The court also ordered Sarah to pay my legal fees, which came to another $35,000. Best of all, the judge included a provision in the settlement that required Sarah to write a formal letter of apology acknowledging that she had deliberately exploited my grief over my wife's death to facilitate the fraud. She had to read that letter aloud in court, in front of David, in front of the press, in front of everyone. I donated the $75,000 in punitive damages to a legal aid society that helps seniors avoid financial scams. Seemed like the right thing to do with money that came from someone preying on older folks. David and I had some difficult conversations during and after the trial. He made terrible choices, but he was genuinely remorseful and willing to do the hard work of rebuilding our relationship. The marriage counselor he'd been seeing helped him understand how completely Sarah had manipulated him. She kept telling me that you were trying to control us through money, he explained during one of our monthly dinners last fall. That you were using your investment to keep me dependent on you instead of building my own life with her. Did you ever think to ask me directly about that? I said. I should have. I was afraid you'd deny it, and then I'd be caught between you and Sarah. So I convinced myself that avoiding the conversation was protecting everyone. We're working on rebuilding trust, David and I. It's slow going, but we talk every week now. He's dating someone new, a teacher named Amanda, who seems genuinely kind. When I met her last month, the first thing she said was how much David talks about his father and how proud he is of my engineering career. Sarah tried to contact me after her release from federal prison, wanting to make amends and move forward as a family. I had Stanley send her a cease and desist letter. Some people don't deserve forgiveness, especially when their apology is just another manipulation attempt. The whole experience taught me some hard lessons about trust, even family trust, but it also showed me that being older doesn't mean being helpless. Experience counts for something, patience counts for something, and sometimes the best revenge is simply ensuring that justice gets served properly through the legal system. I still do consulting work for Boeing sometimes, helping younger engineers understand complex systems integration. They always seem surprised that someone my age understands their technical challenges and can navigate corporate politics better than they can. But that's their mistake, just like it was Sarah's. Never underestimate an old engineer who's had 35 years to study how systems work, whether they're mechanical, corporate, or criminal. These days, I'm more careful about who I trust with my money and my heart, but I'm not bitter. Justice was served, my retirement is secure, and I've got a son who's learned some hard lessons about choosing the right partner. Sometimes that's all you can ask for. Trust is earned through consistency, not blood relations. And when someone shows you who they really are through their actions, believe them the first time. The greatest strength of experience isn't just knowing how systems work, but having the patience to let justice work through proper channels rather than rushing into emotional reactions.